And I know it's a long story, and it's one of the most fascinating pieces of writing I've read. I was completely hooked from start to finish. Can you retell the story of the traveling mystic, aka Storm Corleone, or at least walk me through that saga? Because I just think it's super interesting and like how you guys collided and how everything happened.
Sure. So I was out of high school, but I was not yet in university. I didn't have plans to go to university. I was just sort of uh, drifting, you could say, to some extent. I had other plans. I wanted to go to an audio recording school or something like that, but I didn't have clear plans. And I met somebody who was playing guitar on the streets. So again, I don't. It's hard to walk through the whole thing. It's actually a pretty dramatic moment in my life at the time. But what happened in effect was I met a guy who was busking. Okay, he was playing guitar on the streets, and he offered me, as it were, like an apprenticeship. Like an apprenticeship. So he offered me to busk with him, and he would sort of initiate me into the soul of a blues artist. So a blues artist is somebody who, has had a run-in with the devil, who has some scars on his soul, who's willing to sacrifice a lot for the sake of soulfulness. And this person struck me that way. It was kind of weird. I definitely felt like there was some greater force at play. Like I felt like this is not going to capture it, but from the outside, I would say I felt like I was in a movie for sure. The closest movie that I've seen that comes to it is Training Day. If people have ever seen Training Day, I
Mm.
watched Training Day once after this run-in, and I was like, flashbacks in a sense. So
Did he
I met
remind
this
you
guy.
of Denzel, or who
Yeah,
would
he
he have
reminded me
been?
of Denzel exactly. And
Wow.
not just that he reminded me of Denzel, but the experience that I had reminded me of the experience that was conveyed in the
Yeah.
movie in a big way. So anyway, I agreed to do this sort of like apprenticeship. Okay, so this guy was a busker. His name was Storm Corleone. He was a Sicilian, black Sicilian. He had a buddy who used to be a white nationalist. They met in prison. So it was like a black guy and a white nationalist busking on the streets, all kinds of crazy songs. And we'd have big audiences coming from Detroit because we were playing across the river from Detroit. This was when Windsor was still a city that had a lot of people. So
Hmm.
it was a wild, wild experience. Okay. I don't even know how to convey the details, but what happened is I put aside all my life plans to go on the road with this person. We did go on the road. We did busk. Um, at some point, I no longer wanted to do that. And I was effectively like kidnapped or held hostage, you could say, in that situation. And
Could you
yeah, I don't
say it,
know. It's
or
hard.
is
It's
that
hard to walk.
actually?
It's hard to walk through the details.
Could you
It was
let me
weird.
see if I
You
could
know, it was a
prompt
weird.
it a little bit. So, what do you remember the moment where you decided to give up whatever life you were leading for at least a period of time, whether it was kidnapping or a total autonomy or somewhere in between? Do you remember that moment and what
Yeah.
the immediate aftermath was of like the coming days and weeks?
Yeah. So, okay, look, I was planning on going to an audio recording school, like I said. Then I met this person. We started playing music. I felt like I was undergoing some spiritual, psychological, musical initiation. And I decided that I was not going to go according to my plans. I was going to follow my destiny, which is what this was increasingly seeming like. I was going to follow my destiny come what may. And I was going to hit the road with this person to play music. Okay. I was going to become a traveling musician. So, no, I think at one point he told me, is like, I was giving up the world of a golden cage. What's a golden cage? A golden cage is you have no freedom. Somehow everything is provided for, but you have no freedom. And on the other side of that was a life that was going to be difficult for people to understand from the outside, but that represented a serious kind of inner freedom. It was like a breaking with the world. By the way, I remember, yeah, so this was 2000, this was 2001.
Hmm.
And So I definitely felt like I'm stepping into my destiny. I'm going off the beaten track. I know that what I'm doing is going to seem strange to everybody else around me. It's going to be inexplicable. It's not something I'm going to be able to convey. But when you have a muse, or when you have whatever correct image is to think about, you're just dialed into that. So that's what I was dialed into. And that's what we did. It was this weird musical apprenticeship. I did hit the road with him. And the feeling or sensation that I had when we first started was, like I said, purely musical, in the sense of there's some muse, there's some destiny, there's some strange fate. This is mine and I'm all in on it. I don't know where it's going to lead me. I just know that I have to sort of follow it. There's a
Yeah.
very strong sense like that. Obviously, as an older person now, or if I put myself in the shoes of the people who are around me, it was incomprehensible. Like, it couldn't possibly have made sense to anybody from the outside looking in. But sometimes
Yeah.
that's what it looks like when you follow what you feel like is your destiny.
So there's a scene in Training Day where Denzel makes I forgot Ethan Hawke. Is it Ethan Hawke? Yeah. The name of his character, but Denzel makes Ethan Hawke smoke what he tells him is weed, and it turns out being PCP. And you could see the wheels turning in Ethan Hawke's mind once he sobers up. That maybe Denzel's not the cop that I thought he was, or he's not the guy I pictured him to be. Did you have a parallel moment like that with Storm, with the Traveling Mystic, where you're like, I don't think this is the guy that I initially pictured?
Yes, there were moments like that for sure. I think it's better not to get into the details, but there were moments like that. And, the culminating moment is the one that I did write about in that piece on the Traveling Mystic. The culminating moment is the one where I had the impression, once we were already on the road, that I would be free to leave. And he gave me that impression. He gave me that false impression, and he let me know that I would be, uh, punished basically for wanting to leave. So he played me. He played me pretty badly at the almost last stage of our drama. And that was just straight out of a movie. There's no other way to put it. You couldn't have scripted it. So yeah, that was extremely unpleasant. That was probably, you know, I would say in some sense, thank God I haven't lived a crazier life, but that was probably the lowest moment of my life that I can remember, because that was like, wow, completely blindsided. And there were all sorts of, it's very ugly, unexpected, completely uh, bad scenario. But as I also write about in that piece, um, the resolution of this bad scenario was also like something that I think couldn't have been scripted, which is he had a turnaround. He had some sort of moment of clarity, or his conscience hit, or who knows what. But the battle between good and evil in his soul, temporarily at least, good won out. I'm curious somehow whether that's true in the long run. But at the time, let's say he had two inclinations. One was like completely destroy my life, which is where I thought things were going. And by the way, to destroy my life meant, as I wrote in that piece, to like destroy the lives of my family.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be, if you really want to hurt somebody, you don't go after that person, you go after what that person loves. So it's like that was a real dark possibility. But in the midst of this dark moment, he was overcome with repentance. And he told me, when he came to make amends with me, when I was basically in hell, that he remembered the moment my mom prayed for us before we left on our road trip. And he told me that that was the only time in his life that he ever bowed his head in prayer. So that to me is also like insane, cinematic, deep, moving, significant in a way that I don't know that anything, nothing is just so strange. Like you had like maybe I was part of his destiny, maybe he was part of my destiny. I don't know why it worked out this way, but we went from things being very dark and very much like there's no way out of a hellhole to he remembered my mother's prayer that he bowed his head to, he repented, and he went over to the good side. He went over to the light. And from that moment on until I had my last communication with him, basically when I did part ways from him, genuinely it was like there was no more rocky road. Like he made it smooth
Mm.
sailing for me to go on with my life. But I guess people can read that if they want to. I mean, I don't even have I can describe what happened like I try to do in that piece. I don't really have the words to convey it because all I can say is it was like the lowest low and this weird moral resolution at the end. And I was caught up in the midst of it. And it seems crazy that it ever happened, but it did. And I only hope that, whatever that battle of good and evil was in his heart, that, evil stayed defeated for the long run. But yeah, we had, there were crazy moments, not all of which I would be willing to discuss. And that's just what it was. It was this weird. So when I said earlier that, I have a high tolerance for chaos or like the non-beaten path, I wasn't somebody who was like in high school, I was thinking about university. And the minute I graduated high school, I knew I went to the best university. I had this weird little intermediary period,
Mm.
where it was like what I just said, felt like the ground was slipping beneath my feet. I was busking. There was weird musical initiation, weird characters, crazy stuff. And that's just what it was. So in hindsight, I should say, I never really know what to make of what happened. Like I'm older now. I was 17 then, I'm 40 now. Okay. So sometimes I think, boy, that was stupid. Maybe I should never have done that. Maybe my life would have been much different in a good way if I had just done the beaten path. Like if I went to audio recording school and, I never had this crazy run in. But actually, I do feel like the scars on the soul were a necessary thing. It's just like
Mm.
it's something that had to happen. It's something that it's good that it's happened, good that it happened. And again, the one unknown for me really is, whether the angel or the devil took hold of him when we parted ways.
Yeah. What was was it arson that he threatened your family with, or what was the threat that you wrote about towards the
So
end?
what I wrote about is let's say there were people, like there were people in and around who could have been fire starters, and things
Okay.
like that. So, like it was, as I say, there were some dark moments there, which I'm glad didn't play out the way they could have.
And then there
And
was the transition where, at least for however long you stayed with Storm after that, it was like darkness to light, like you were saying.
yeah, exactly. Like first it was pretty straightforward. We were playing music, then there were some Denzel moments where it was less obvious what exactly I'd gotten myself into and whether it made sense to stick. At some point the apprenticeship ends. Like, maybe at some point it seemed like, okay, it's a good time to go. And then, as I mentioned, he gave me the impression that I could go. I got played, and he left me high and dry for a minute with all kinds of threats about what I could expect to happen to
Yeah.
me and to the people around me. And then there was the moment where he had thank God, a moment of good versus evil where good won out. Then he came and he made it actually possible for me to go. And then I left, and that was basically it. So that was like some strange little episode in my life and in his life. And, it doesn't really matter if I wish it went differently or it did happen or didn't happen. It is what it is, and it was what it was. And I have tried to reflect on it from time to time. Again, I thought it would be interesting to write about, cathartic in a sense. And for me, the story ends in a way with, and this is kind of arbitrary. Everybody who writes a book or does an artistic performance or has some conception for a movie, they get to decide whether they leave it on a high note or a low note. Whether they try to undermine what was good about it or amplify what was bad about it. And the fact that he had been redeemed by a mother's prayer at the end of my involvement with the story is sort of the high note I prefer to leave it on. And
Mm.
I almost don't even want to know what came next.